we are in the midst of what I call twin pandemics, COVID-19 and COVID-16-19, as Reverend Otis Moss III calls it, it is present with us. And I want to kick this panel off with a humanizing moment, just to see how you two are doing and where your minds are and where your hearts are in this moment. Kaytlin, can you share with us where you are?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, and thank you all so much for having me. It's such a privilege. I think right now, and JT and Olivia and I have spoken about this a little bit, but I think right now I think a lot of my colleagues actually are in this position of recovering from the spring and what all we've been through here in New York City, and also bracing for the future. So we're really trying to soak in the sun of the summer, and also, we're kind of holding our breath at the same time, and sitting with this fear of the unknown.
Yeah, Olivia, how are you doing in this moment?
Yeah, I was not on the front lines, but I think that resonates with me a lot. That feeling of kind of recovering from everything that happened, and seeing the resurgence of Black Lives Matter was really, really inspiring and really uplifting, but it was also really difficult. I think bringing a lot of really hard things to light, and having people realize for the first time things that I already knew and my family already knew. So it was hard, but I do feel like I'm in a place where just seeing the people around me, seeing everything they've done and how people are really engaged, it has really filled me up, and my cup is not full by any means, but it's getting there, and I feel more energized to continue to do the work.
Thanks for sharing. What I want to do for our time together is quickly, or as best as we can, I want to talk about your roles particularly. And Kaytlin, you serve as a chaplain. And what I would love for you to do is tell us a little bit about yourself in your journey to the chaplaincy at Mount Sinai.
Sure. So my name's Kaytlin Butler. I'm a recently ordained Presbyterian pastor. I'm a chaplain at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I've worked here for 3 years. I typically work with the cancer teams here, and of course everybody's roles have changed quite a bit over the course of 2020. I did not come to chaplaincy intentionally. It was very much an accident. I was finishing seminary, and folks will know that experience of getting towards the end of graduate school and not really knowing what comes next. And I decided to stay in New York City and to take a post in a clinical chaplaincy training program at Mount Sinai Hospital, where I was really intended to be a bridge between where I was and where I was going. And I ended up finding a career that I just absolutely adored, and was fortunate enough to be hired here. And the things that mean so much to me are the opportunity as a chaplain to cultivate and create good goodbyes for my patients and for their families. And that's the piece that everybody associates with chaplains, right? The component of my work that is death and dying. There's a different component of my work that is accompaniment, and being with people in the midst of crisis and in the midst of extraordinary change. And I think what draws me so much to that work is the way in which it's a no bullshit kind of environment, right? Like when we're asking about our relationship, or when we're talking about faith, when we're talking about God, when we're in sort of these crucibles of change, those questions get really hard. And what I really like is sitting with people as they figure out what the answers are to those questions for themselves.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful experiences that I've had, and this was actually when I was working here at IFYC, I lost my father, and one of the most powerful experiences was to be able to have not only family, because I'm from Texas. I got my Texas mask here. But to have coworkers surround me and hold me in that moment is really powerful. So I'm very appreciative of how you are describing the work of the chaplaincy. I'm wondering, in this moment of a pandemic, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're in New York, right? At the epicenter of when the pandemic began. I'm wondering how your work looks differently now during this crisis.
So there are a lot of ways that I've talked about historically that our work has changed insofar as, you know, these ways of connecting with people that are tactile are no longer possible, right? So we're in these awful moments. People are sick, many are dying during the course of the surge. You can't hold a hand, you can't pray, people can't be there, and it's really tragic. And I think that's really important, and those nightmares are real, and I don't think we need to ignore them. And in this moment of recovery, I think what's most salient for me is how raw everyone is, and how the ways in which this year and this experience of a pandemic has resulted in people taking a really long look at their own lives and their own values. And so I guess my answer to your question, how has your work changed, is that I'm having to walk my talk a little bit harder, you know? So it's one thing to sit with people and try to discern, what are your values? What's important to you in this moment? And I've had to look at that for myself. And I tell my patients that I deal in storytelling. Chaplains deal in storytelling, and what are the stories we tell about ourselves and about God and about the world. And I've had to look at the stories that I've been telling about myself and figure out what stories I was willing to, that felt honest to me. So since then I've come out as a gay woman, and, you know, it is just, it's amazing how this moment has forced us all to be so honest, and to be so honest with each other, and just be so honest with our communities, and to be really clear about what's real and what's not real, and who we are and who we aren't. And I think that's having an incredible impact on my conversation with patients. It's having an incredible impact on the way that I move around in the world and the ways that I do ministry.
Ooh, that's so powerful. I really love the sort of the retrospective piece, that these questions of death have a way of putting things in focus for us, right? Like, what is really important. And I'm just in awe of the work that you're doing and the stories that you're sharing in this moment. You've already spoken to this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could dig a little bit deeper and share how this change, either personally and professionally. I know you shared recently that you were ordained as a reverend, so there are lots of things happening in your life that are shifting the way in which you see the world. But I'm wondering if you could speak professionally to this chaplaincy, and how has this changed, caused you to think about your role and work differently?
So I think it's really cemented the way that I think about my work. So when I went to seminary, I was trying to figure out, how did I contextualize the sacredness that I saw and the holy experiences that I had with people and friends of other faith traditions? How did I understand that in the language of my own tradition in a way that was intelligible to people inside of my own tradition? You know, it's one thing to say, well, my best friend is Muslim. Well, okay, my best friend is Muslim, and what does that mean for what I think about God? What does that mean for what I believe and how I practice and what my actual theology is? So that's the thing that I went to seminary with. And it's also, and the answer to that question is what I bring to my chaplaincy, and what I think, using the language of my own tradition, is what chaplaincy is at its heart, which is a sacramental endeavor. You know, in my tradition, we use language of sacrament to talk about these ineffable ways that we experience God in places that we can only experience right there. And to me, when I get to meet somebody who has a very different experience of God than I do, who has had a different life than I have had, who is having an acutely different experience than the one that I am having, I think that I learned something about the divine in that encounter that I couldn't learn anywhere else except for in that moment. And to be able to meet somebody where they're at, to see them, to bear witness spiritually to who they are, to me, that's what my work, that's the core of my work. And as a chaplain and as a pastor.
So we've had a group of people here that have spent the day grappling with what does interfaith work mean in this moment? And I'm wondering specifically for your area of work, what do you believe the role is of interfaith work in this pandemic, specifically through the lens of healthcare workers?
I think that healthcare workers in this pandemic are a model of interfaith work. I think that they are the gold standard, frankly. Among the most beautiful things I've ever seen are medical residents who have never, are not spiritual, but not religious or atheists, or maybe that God talk just doesn't work for them, or maybe they're kind of ambivalent about what they think about God, and they're fumbling over Arabic words, trying to figure out how do you pray for somebody? Or they're calling me or my colleagues and saying, this person's family isn't here, but can you say a blessing for them? Because I don't know what God is, but I know that their life was sacred. And holding phones to make sure that they get to say goodbye to their loved ones, and trying, doing everything that they possibly can to make sure that that person's life has been honored. To me, it's the most prolific form of interfaith work I've ever seen.
That's beautiful. I do want to bring in our other fabulous panelist, Olivia, and give you a second to tell us a little bit more about yourself, and particularly how you got connected to criminal justice reform work at forward.us.
Yeah, so my name is Olivia Elder, and I was raised mostly in New Orleans and in Houston, Texas. Moved around a lot. I know. See, the Texas bond is strong, but I spent most of my childhood in New Orleans and Houston, Texas. And I think I came to interfaith work before I came to criminal justice reform work. And that was a very personal and difficult journey, because I just wanted to understand myself and my family. And I think that for a long time, as a Black person from the American South, I felt like I didn't know myself and I didn't know my roots. There was no way to learn about that through school. They were not teaching us my history, and I felt like it was hard to connect with myself and understand where my elders were coming from. And so I wanted to understand us. I wanted to understand our family, the way that we talked about each other, the way that we loved each other. And to me, one major way to understand that was to understand our faith. And I feel like there is a very strong connection, especially between Black Americans and faith. And so as I endeavored to understand my faith, I think I learned a lot about myself. And so when I was in college, I thought I was going to do immigration reform work, which was super, super relevant living in South Texas. And there were lots of connections between faith, migration, immigration reform, things going on. And I ended up interning at Texas Civil Rights Project. And that summer that I was interning with them, there was a really big crisis at the border, and people were being buried in trash bags. Migrants coming over the border were being buried in mass graves, no notice, no death certificate, in trash bags. And I think at that moment, it hit me like the connection between, the work and my faith, where how can you believe in human dignity, the dignity of every human life, if you're going to treat people this way? It didn't seem fair. It didn't seem reasonable.
Sorry, it's hard to decide.
Just a reminder, if you're not speaking, can you be sure to mute your mic? Thanks. Sorry, Olivia.
No worries. So yeah, that hit me really hard. And it reminded me of something that my parents told me in New Orleans during the hurricane. We were in New Orleans to Houston transplants, as are a lot of people. But I asked them, why is it so bad for people that look like us? Why is that? And why is it that, our neighbors are hurting and people who look like me are hurting? And my mom explained to me, this was an act of God, but there are people who aren't looking out for you. And there are people who don't value you and who don't love you. And that's why more people who look like you died. And it reminded me of that moment of really understanding human dignity and the dignity of a human life. So in that, I came to Forward.us, my organization, as an intern in the immigration team. There was no criminal legal reform team at the time. And that's what I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to work. And when I graduated, there was not a job on that team. It wasn't available. So obviously, knowing where I wanted to work and being a senior in college, I applied to anything that was open. And one job was open on the criminal legal reform team. But as I started work and I started thinking about, this issue in my own life, I started to feel comfortable talking about the ways the criminal legal system had affected me and my family. And that was something I never, ever talked about. There was so much shame and so much stigma coming with, having a family member, a close loved one being incarcerated. It felt like something that you could not talk about. This is family business. This is embarrassing. People are going to judge you. And I think as I worked with people who were where I was 5 years ago, and who needed what I needed to connect with their families, I became a lot more comfortable talking about my own family and my own experience and that shame and that stigma that had come with that. So yeah, I have had family members that are incarcerated, and I think that fighting for other families like mine has really fueled me and has really pushed me to do more in this work. And, I want to be honest, it wasn't something that we talked about in our family at all. And I want to get rid of the stigma for other families and really support them as well, while also fighting for them. And so that's kind of the roundabout way that I came to not only like interfaith work, but criminal legal reform work.
Oh, that's beautiful. And as you're speaking, I can't help but think about the ways in which the criminal justice system has had an impact on my own family, right? Where I think Michelle Alexander's work made clear that so many Black folks are caught in this criminal justice caste system. I've heard statistics of 1 in 3 Black folks are somewhere in the criminal justice system, right? Whether being detained or actually imprisoned or on probation. So it's just such a wide net that this system spreads. And, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about my own experience. We don't often talk about family members that are incarcerated. They just become these ghosts that haunt the spaces in which we live. And if someone hasn't told you this already, I know I'm grateful for the work that you're doing, and the beautiful blending of criminal justice work with interfaith sensibilities. So as a layperson, talk to me a little bit about what your work looks like day to day in criminal justice reform.
Yeah. So I work on our partnerships and engagement team, and I work with mostly our grassroots and community-based partners. I also manage our portfolio of families-focused work. So what we lovingly call our Families Project, but ways that we think about supporting families and lifting families. That is what I do. So it's just really cool to feel like I'm supporting direct service organizations on the ground while also advocating for policy solutions that can support them. But that is mostly what I do day to day, is meeting with groups, supporting them, seeing in what ways I can fill their needs, while also doing some policy analysis. But it's just been amazing to learn more about them, but also, like I mentioned earlier, learn a lot about myself. And then to plug forward a little bit more, we did release a report 2 years ago about the family impact of incarceration. We found that 1 in 2 Americans have had a family member incarcerated, and that seems so huge. It seems so incredible. But I look at myself, my family, my parents, and it makes a lot of sense. So it feels really cool to be supporting other families that are the 1 and 2 as well.
Oh, that's powerful. And hopefully we can get that story out to folks. Because I would love to read the report. I haven't read it myself. I'm wondering too, if you could talk a little bit about how interfaith work intersects in your mind with criminal justice reform, what do you see as the areas of overlap, and are there areas of separation that are worth calling out?
Yeah, I think that there are areas of maybe hypocrisy a lot. And I think that, like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to look at people who don't believe in the dignity of every single human life, but who claim religion all the time. And that is something that really drives me, is the call to respect human life and to reduce harm wherever I can. And so that's what fuels me. And I do see that disconnect a lot. But I do think there are lots of interfaith connections. And the ways that I talk about it mostly are justice, redemption, and family. Those are three themes that show up in any faith around the world. And if you believe in justice, how can you have a system that perpetuates so much injustice? If you believe in redemption, our system is just punitive. It's not redemptive. If you believe in family, if you believe in community and connection, why would you take people away from their family for years, decades at a time? And we're the only country that incarcerates people for as long as we do. So there are so many ways that, people of different faiths can come together and really see that fighting for reform of the system is a way to live out your faith. And I think one interesting way that I see my faith is as a framing tool to kind of frame the way that I can see the system. And I think one thing that's been so interesting, when you look at like the three Abrahamic religions, they all do a really good job of laying out the history of the major characters. They set the stage and they explain how generationally this has continued. And so one way you see that, in Genesis, there's the begats. So Adam begat so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And you look at Islam and you can trace Muhammad's lineage all the way back to Adam. And so as you think about lineage, you think about history, about generations, I think that's a really good framing tool to think about the history of the system that we live under. And so in a lot of ways, slavery begat Jim Crow, which begat mass incarceration, which begat all the police violence that we see right now. It's all generational. And we need to go back to the beginning and really think about the story that was laid, and the ways that the system has been passed down. And so that's one way that I like to think about the ways that my faith helps me understand the criminal legal system. But the final way, and I think maybe the most important way that interfaith is so important to this, is the idea of community and collaboration. And, as we all could guess, Black people are the most hurt by this system in the US. And Black people belong to every major religion. And so as you think about, even fighting for your brothers and sisters in faith, many of them are over-criminalized. And so in what ways can we stand up for them too? When we talk about being my brother's keeper, what does that mean for us? And we need to stand up for people, even if they don't necessarily look like us. But even beyond that, religious minorities are also over-criminalized. Minorities in general are over-criminalized. And so when we think about this system that is rooted in slavery begat the current system. It is ever expanding. That system of trauma, of brokenness, of hurt is ever expanding, and it's hurting all of us. And so when you talk about the 1 and 2, it doesn't matter what political party you are, it doesn't matter what race you are, even what income level you are, people still are impacted by incarceration. And so when we think about what does it mean to stand up for people? What does it mean to be in collaboration with people, to love people together? How can we fight against a system that is hurtful and traumatic, but is also ever expanding constantly? So those are the major ways I think about how interfaith is important to this.
Wow, what an amazing analogy! I'm letting you know right now that I'm borrowing that. I'll be sure to cite you the first time, but after that, I'm gonna claim it. No, I'm just kidding. But I am that is wow. It is blowing my mind to think about slavery begatting these other systems. As you are working towards criminal justice reform, I know I've been recently exposed to the abolitionist movement. And I'm wondering how you think about abolition in relation to criminal justice reform.
Yeah, and so this is a good point to say that, my opinions here are not the opinions of my organization, and I love 4.us. I'm super proud to work for an organization that does the work that we do. But there are certain things that we aren't the best suited to talk about. But I, as a Black woman from the American South, as a person of faith and as an identified abolitionist, I do have opinions about this. And I think the opinions that fuel me really start with, in the Bible, Isaiah 1:17, we're called to seek justice and correct oppression. And I feel like if my commission, my great commission, is to seek justice, that cannot be found in the system that we have now. It can't. And knowing that the system came from slavery and thrives off of injustice, there is really no way to reform it. And one example that we use is kind of adding on additions to a house with a bad foundation. The foundation is rotting. And adding on additions to this foundation is not going to solve the problem. New windows aren't going to solve the problem. And so we need to really rethink the way that we think about justice, that we think about redemption, that we think about repairing harm. And I don't think we can do that effectively if we have this punitive system where the only goal is to remove people and punish them, and not to help them, not to rehabilitate them, not even to repair the harm that they did if they harmed someone. And that would be a complete rethinking of the system that we have now. And I think one way that I think about it, especially when you think about the long sentences that we have in this country that are unheard of, they are not typical for any other country in the world. But, I think about Jesus on the cross when he was being crucified, and next to him were two criminals, right, who were being crucified for their crimes. And, Jesus turns to one of them and he says, I say to you today, I will be with you in paradise, in Luke 23. I say to you today, I will be with you in paradise. Not in 25 to life, okay? Not in 90-year sentences, not after community supervision. I say to you today, you are redeemed and you will be with me in paradise. And I think that is the way that I want to think about this system, rather than seeking just to punish people forever. And in what ways can we work with them? Can we redeem them and work with their communities and make sure communities are strong so we can all be together in paradise? And that is a system that I want and I look forward to and that I think would be redemptive.
Wow. So Kaytlin, I want to invite you back into the conversation for us to talk about, in these last few minutes, we need more time. In these last few minutes, I would love for you all to begin sharing what futures you imagine for interfaith work in your respective positions.
So I think that the thing about that question in this moment is that it's really hard for me to think about the future at all. It's hard, I wonder if other people can relate to that. It's hard to think about next month, next year, next week. Most of us are just trying to get to tomorrow. So for me, in this moment, the best answer I have.
You're muted.
Oh, is that better? Sorry, y'all.
It's
Thank
okay.
you.
Working through technology. You're good.
Yes. The best answer I have for that right now, given that I can't see into the future, I can't see into next month, I can't see into next week, is that interfaith work right now, to me, is wearing a mask. It is practicing, it is taking precautions, it is getting your flu shot, it is using the full scope of our civil rights to demand changes at the state and federal level so that this doesn't happen again, and to grieve and to look at the loss of life that we have borne witness to vis-a-vis this pandemic, vis-a-vis police brutality, and to honor it by doing something about it and to figure out what our role is in that. That, to me, that's the only thing that interfaith work can be right now, is figuring out how to protect each other and keep each other safe.
Thank you. Olivia, do you have anything to add, or you've already shared a little bit of your envisioned future when you spoke about that this connection to abolition, but I'm wondering if you have a even more nuanced or broader vision for what the work looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I have goals for what I want the work to look like, and also, to be honest, what the work already looks like. And I think that Black Lives Matter was a really good testament to that. The people that came and stood up for us, ourselves, and for each other was amazing. And so another IFYC alumni started a group called Dharma for Black Lives. So people from the Dharmic faiths could come together and stand up for Black lives. And that is not only happening right now, but it's common. And seeing that togetherness and working together is already happening. And I want that to continue. But I think for what I hope for the future, I think there's a huge role for the faith community at large in a future without punitive systems, without the prison industrial complex. And, you know, one thing that's really important is community care. And so why do people commit harm? Because they have needs that aren't being met in their community. And so from a faith perspective, are there ways that we can meet our brothers and sisters' needs? Do people need fellowship? Do they need community? Do they need food? Do they need education? Do they need jobs? And those are solutions that the faith community can come up with on their own and create healthier communities that don't have a need really for policing, let's say, or for really punitive sentences. Or are there ways that somebody can get help if they need it, or counseling if they need it, and they can repair the harm that way through their own faith tradition, rather than, you know, calling the cops and sending that person to jail or prison. So there's definitely a role for the interfaith community to play, but like I said, if I'm being honest, I think people are really stepping up and doing it already.
That's awesome. I want to give you a second to ask questions of each other. I've been moderating, but we've been having conversations before this and they've just been so rich. So I'm wondering if you all have any questions or thoughts that you want to ask of each other.
I do.
Oh, Olivia, can I ask you a question, please?
Sure, of course.
I listen, you speak so eloquently. And I'm just so moved by what you said about family and redemption and justice. And I'm wondering, in your work, how do you take care of yourself in the midst of dealing with a pandemic, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, the fact that that people of color are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic? What's giving you hope?
That's crazy, because that was actually my question to both of y'all, especially you, Kaytlin, as a frontline worker. But I'll say for myself, being honest, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And I think that I'm blessed enough to rely on my family and have them close to me and talk with them. And we're going through some hard stuff as well. My father lost some of his relatives to COVID. And so watching him go through that and not being able to be there with his family was really difficult. But I think, to be honest, fighting for your own liberation is really, really exhausting. And it's fun and cool when it's a thought exercise. But when it's like, oh, like that was my grandfather, I don't want that to happen to any other people ever again. It just becomes extra heavy, and you end up reliving a lot of that trauma all the time. But I would say for me, and I know it's so hard right now because I can't be with people and touch them. Like I'm a people person and I want to be with people and love them and touch them. But community has been really inspiring and really helpful. And they've held me up when I couldn't hold myself up, and I want to be that for other people as well. And that truly is the way that I get by. And journaling and prayer, and not letting anything sit too long without writing it down has been really helpful. But I bounce that question right back. Kaytlin, I want to hear from you. Like, I know you did take a sabbatical, but how are you taking care of yourself, seeing all these really tough things?
Similarly, it's really hard. I was really lucky to be able to take that time away. And I think, it's the same, similar to what you said, which is leaning on community. We really just, the ways that we need community to survive today and every day. I really look to good friends who I can call and cry to. I am so blessed to go home to my girlfriend, who is just a constant source of love and light, and humor too. Trying to figure out, trying to laugh, trying to try to connect and find joy, and to hold that up as holy too.
JT, I'd love to hear from you too, what your answer is.
Oh, I don't have a good answer for this. So as a faculty member, there was a way in which I have learned what faculty are and how they're supposed to do, right? Like in my mind, a faculty member always has the right answer. They're really smart, they're really polished, and they just are able to hold themselves together in moments of chaos. And I feel like I am none of those things. It's what I feel when I'm lecturing to a screen full of Zoom faces, right? Like that's my life right now. But I think one of the things I'm trying to do, and building off of your point of community, is to create that, to stop, to rest, and recognize that I'm not a machine, and that my value doesn't come through how productive I am, right? That there is something good about me, especially when I rest. So identifying as a Christian, right? There's this notion of Sabbath rest, and that if I'm understanding this narrative, God didn't need to rest, right? But I think there's some symbolic power in my own theology of seeing God as the creator of this universe, telling us to rest, and that there is actual power in resting. In our session today, the unconference session, we talked about that, how these systems often thrive through exploitation of our labor, right? By doing way more work, right? We make other people very wealthy, and we kill ourselves in the process. So what I'm trying to do is spend time with my wife. We can watch something on Netflix and just support each other. We started a practice of what I call gratefuls in the morning. So one of the first things we do before we get out of bed is say 6 things that we're grateful for. And I used to think that was real hokey and cheesy, but it's actually done a lot to help me feel better about all of these crises that we're facing. We need more time, y'all. I have thoroughly enjoyed facilitating this panel with you as folks doing really important work. And we're honored and grateful to hear from your voices.